The summer on Privet Drive had a way of pressing down like a lid. Heat pooled in the cul-de-sac, hedges stood trimmed into perfect obedience, and the Dursley house glowed with that surface-level polish they loved. A gleaming front door, stiff curtains, a carpet that never showed a speck of dust. Inside, Petunia polished, Vernon boomed, and Dudley lounged over every piece of furniture like a small emperor surveying land he had conquered by lying on it. And in the smallest bedroom upstairs, Harry Potter lay awake, watching a square of orange streetlight crawl across the ceiling. A year ago, he'd been nobody, sleeping in a cupboard under the stairs. Now, he was a second year at a school the Dursleys refused to name, with friends the Dursleys refused to admit existed, and a trunk under his bed filled with books and robes and a wand they pretended wasn't real. It should have felt better than before. It should have felt like progress. But the Dursleys had a way of turning even good things into a long, slow winter. Downstairs, Petunia rehearsed a smile in the hall mirror, the bright, brittle one she used on guests when she wanted to look generous without being generous. "Remember," she whispered to Harry earlier, her mouth tight, "dinner tonight is important. Mr. and Mrs. Mason are rich. You will stay in your room and you will make no sound." Harry nodded, thinking of Hogwarts like a distant island, a castle full of floating candles and shifting stairs, and friends who laughed with him instead of at him. He could feel the memory of it like warmth in his chest, the way you remember a fire after it goes out. A little after sunset, the doorbell chimed. Voices swelled below. Vernon's laugh a little too loud, Petunia's compliments stacked like paper. Dudley spoke only to demand more food. Harry sat on his bed, watching an owl on the telephone wire flex its wings against the last light. And then he heard it. A rustle, a breath, something small moving in the dark. He wasn't alone. Out of the shadows, two large eyes blinked from level with the mattress. A creature perched there, all elbows and ears, wearing what looked like a filthy pillowcase tied at the shoulders. He wrung his hands as if he meant to twist them off. His voice, when it came, was a nervous whisper and a little bit of music. "Harry Potter," it breathed. "So long Dobby has wanted to meet you." The name hung in the room like a dropped plate. Harry sat up fast, knocking his knee against the nightstand. "Who are you?" "How do you know?" "Dobby is a house elf, sir, and Dobby has come to warn you. You must not go back to Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. Terrible things are to happen there. Terrible." Downstairs, cutlery chimed like rain on glass. Laughter swelled, then hushed. Harry glanced at the door. "I have to go back," he whispered. "I live for that place. My friends are there. Why can't I go?" Dobby's eyes gleamed with a kind of frantic pleading. "Dobby cannot say." Dobby must not say. But Harry Potter must be safe. He wouldn't explain, only hurt himself when he tried, smacking his own head, yanking his ears, falling to his knees in apology for any half-truth. Harry grabbed him by the wrist to stop him, panic rising. "Please," he hissed. "They'll hear you." But Dobby was building toward a desperate plan of his own. "Harry Potter has not been receiving his friends' letters," he said faintly, and when Harry blinked, Dobby's guilty look told him the rest. Stolen. Hidden. The lifelines from Ron and Hermione and the Weasleys, cut off by a well-meaning thief trying to keep him home. Before Harry could decide whether to be furious or grateful, downstairs came the clear chime of Petunia's voice. And now, the pudding. The grand finale of the Dursleys' best evening. The thing she had whispered about for 2 days. The thing that would make the Masons like them enough to sign something that made Vernon salivate. Dobby's face creased with resolve. Harry Potter must promise not to return to Hogwarts. Say it. I can't, Harry breathed. Hogwarts is it's the only place. Dobby shut his eyes, braced himself as if against wind, and snapped his fingers. In the kitchen below, the air changed. A beautiful dessert, high, light, trembling, rose gently off its plate like a ghost caught mid-escape. It drifted, ever so softly, out into the dining room where Mr. and Mrs. Mason sat with false smiles. It hung there a heartbeat, perfect, absurd, and then came down across Petunia's spotless table with the sound of a bomb made of cream. Silence shattered into screams. Vernon's roar arrived like thunder. Harry sprang to his feet. "Go!" he hissed to Dobby. "Just go!" The elf vanished with a soft pop. Harry turned for the stairs, but Vernon was already there, his face the colour of bruised plums. "Boy," he growled, voice thick with fury and ambition strangled in one go. "You have ruined my deal." That night, there was no lecture long enough to cool him. He worked instead. He measured. He nailed. He barred. By midnight, a bar of metal lay screwed across Harry's bedroom window. The door had 3 new locks. A flap at the bottom, like something you'd slide food through to a dog, landed with a final clack. The next morning, Petunia's hand slid a cold plate through the flap, a slice of bread and a glass of water. The house grew quiet. Outside, the street continued its performance. Mowers, car doors, the sound of someone spraying a driveway, the small repeated noises of normal. Harry stared at the barred window and felt that island called Hogwarts drift farther out to sea. Days passed like pale copies of each other. He measured time by the length of the light on his floorboards. Hunger was a dull ache. Thirst made his tongue feel like a lid in his mouth. Each night, he watched the square of streetlight slide up the wall, waited for it to fade, and let the sounds of the house settle around him like sand. On the 4th night, a noise scratched at the window, the careful scrape of something metal against the frame. Harry sat up. Another scrape. He moved closer. In the dark glass, his face floated pale, and behind it, a shadow larger than any owl. Headlights flared in the road below. A car. Number. It floated. A Ford Anglia lifted on the air like a ridiculous aircraft, paint glimmering, engine purring. Behind the wheel, freckled and wide-eyed, Ron Weasley grinned at him through the glass. In the back seat, twins leaned across each other with identical looks of delight. "Harry!" Ron mouthed. He gestured to the bars. George, or maybe Fred, produced a length of chain and a hook. The chain snagged the bars. The engine revved. The twins braced their feet on the dashboard, and the car pulled. The bars made a sound like old metal being asked to remember flexibility, then surrendered with a screech and came away, bolts popping free, frame trembling. Inside, Harry laughed out loud for the first time in weeks. Together they worked fast, trunk pulled from under the bed, Hedwig in her cage, the last few things he owned shoved into corners. The door burst open behind him. Vernon thundered across the carpet, hand closing around Harry's ankle, fingers digging into skin with a violence born of fear masquerading as control. For a second, it was all arms and noise and a cage between them, a tangle of grasping. Then the car rolled, momentum shifted, and Harry was pulled free, lifting into the warm night, with hands still reaching for him, like the last grip of a nightmare. They were gone, sailing above the neat roofs and streetlights of Little Whinging. The bar of his own window, a thin black line against Petunia's pretty curtains. Harry pressed his face to the cool glass and laughed again, fear sliding off him like rain. "Thought you could use a rescue," Ron said mildly, hands steady on the wheel. "Dobby," Harry said, and told them what had happened, the warning, the dessert, the barred window, the stolen letters. "Blimey," said George, or Fred. "A house elf, right? That's proper dark family magic, that." Ron glanced at him, a shadow of worry crossing his face. "But you're all right now. You're coming home." Home turned out to be a tumble of warmth and noise that had grown into Harry's mind as a rumour, and then unfolded around him as fact. The Burrow. The Weasleys' house sat as if stacked by enthusiastic children, each floor slightly askew, chimneys like periscopes, a garden sprawling around it, in a green tangle of herbs and gnomes and laundry lines that creaked in the morning wind. A clock in the kitchen told where each Weasley was, not the time, but the rhythm of a family's movement through the day. Work, home, travelling, lost. Molly Weasley waited in the doorway with her hands on her hips and love wrapped in scolding. She scolded the flying car, scolded the boys, scolded the hour, and then turned to Harry and softened at once. "Breakfast," she said firmly, pushing food toward him like medicine. "Eat, dear." He ate until he understood again what full felt like. He slept in a room painted by the sun and woke to the smell of frying and the sound of laughter that didn't bark or bite. In the garden, he helped gnome the hedges while the twins demonstrated the proper toss, gnomes rotating through the air like small angry footballs. Hermione's letter, when it arrived, felt like a hand taking his firmly, pulling him back into orbit. Diagon Alley waited like a secret remembered. The leaky cauldron's bricks shifted and folded at Molly's tap, and the archway opened to the street where magic breathed openly. Owls muttering in their cages, a joke shop exploding with noise, the smell of parchment and polish and ingredients that made your nose prickle. Harry's chest lifted at the sound of it. This street had been the first time the world said to him, "You belong here." They split briefly. Molly took Ginny to a second-hand robe shop, her books list clutched tight, her eyes big, her ears red when Harry looked her way. Arthur Weasley trotted behind the boys, stopping to marvel at plugs and posture straighteners, as if they were relics from a temple. "Muggles, Harry," he breathed. "Fascinating. How they make do." In the press of shoppers, Harry lost his footing a moment and found himself nudged sideways through a door that did not promise comfort. The air inside was cold and smelled like old varnish. The sign outside had read Borgin and Burke's, and the items on the shelves whispered danger without making a sound. Cursed necklaces glowing faintly, shriveled hands clutching at nothing, cabinets that seemed to breathe. As he edged toward the door, voices carried from the back room, a sleek one and a purring one he recognized from a train corridor he wouldn't forget. Draco Malfoy stepped into view first, pale hair neat, eyes narrowed with distaste that he mistook for discernment. Behind him, Lucius Malfoy's walking stick tapped once on the floor, and the room felt colder. "Our friends at the Ministry are inspecting the wrong houses," Lucius murmured. lifting an object with 2 careful fingers as if it were a dead thing. One must be prudent. We wouldn't want any misunderstandings. Borgin bowed so low he might have folded himself like a knife. Naturally, sir. Harry held his breath in the shadow of a tall cabinet. When the Malfoys swept out, Draco's glance flicked like a blade over every customer, even those who pretended to examine pickle jars of ill luck. For a heartbeat, Harry thought the boy had scented him like a hound. Then a hand clamped on his shoulder. "Harry!" Hagrid's beard filled his vision. "There ye are. What are you doing in here? Come on, out, out." Back on the sunlit street, everything looked warmer for having seen the room without it. They rejoined the Weasleys outside Flourish and Blotts, where a crowd surged like a tide. A banner stretched across the window, Gilderoy Lockhart, signing today. A man stood inside with a smile polished to a mirror shine, blonde hair gleaming, robes the colour of expensive sky. He posed like a clever portrait that had learned to love itself. The crowd squealed. Lockhart signed and winked and laughed at jokes he hadn't quite heard. Inside, Lockhart spotted Harry the way a hawk spots motion in a field. He pounced elegantly, one arm already forming a flourish to draw attention. "Harry Potter," he cried grandly. "Just the boy I wanted to see." Cameras appeared like mushrooms. Light exploded. Lockhart arranged Harry against him with practiced hands. "Together on the front page, eh? I dare say this will be a treat for your admirers." He thrust a stack of his own books into Harry's arms as if bestowing a knighthood, then fired off a grin so bright it seemed to leave after-images. Lucius arrived just in time to make the room cooler again. He plucked a small, battered book from Ginny's cauldron with 2 fingers and held it up, sneer gentle as poison. "Second hand. Times are hard at the Burrow, are they?" Arthur stepped forward, heat in his face, and for a moment Diagon Alley felt like it might split along a line that had nothing to do with cobblestones. Then Hagrid's shadow fell across them both. The air changed, and the Malfoys glided out with that special grace arrogant men give themselves. Under the bright sun, the Weasleys delivered the same lesson they always had. Sometimes the only counterspell for cruelty was a hand on your shoulder, laughter, and a sandwich wrapped in paper. They finished their shopping. Books stacked in arms, robes folded, wands held like promises. September arrived the way it always did, with sharper air, a sense that the year had a shape again. King's Cross filled with noise, trolleys rattling, owls complaining, children running, the line between ordinary and impossible drawn thin as a whisker. The barrier to platform 9 3/4 waited for that quiet bravery Harry had learned last year. Don't hesitate. Walk into the impossible and let it open. Mrs. Weasley kissed cheeks. Fred and George vanished through the barrier with a flourish. Percy adjusted his badge and drifted like a small headmaster. Ginny took a breath and disappeared neatly between 9 and 10. Ron and Harry reached the barrier together, hands tight on trunks, eyes on the clock, and hit solid brick. The trolley banged hard into a wall that should have been air. The barrier stayed closed. The station hummed around them in perfect Muggle indifference. They tried again. Again. The barrier did not yield. The clock hands jumped. The train's whistle shrieked like a metal thing having a nightmare. Smoke drifted. When it cleared, the platform on the other side held a red engine sliding away, black wheels turning, students waving from windows, and an empty space where two boys were meant to stand. Ron looked at Harry, face pale under freckles. "The car," he said weakly. "The car." There are decisions children should not have to make standing under fluorescent lights in a crowded station, hearts pounding. This wasn't a good decision. It wasn't even a particularly clever one. But it was what they had. The Ford Anglia sat where it had been tucked. Blue paint, windows smudged with fingerprints, engine that purred like a cat taught to whistle. "Your mum," Harry managed. "I know," Ron said bravely and gulped. The car lifted with a soft shiver, and then London fell away under them like a map someone was slowly rolling up. Roofs, roads, rivers, a patchwork of fields, a line of smoke racing north, the Hogwarts Express like a red stitch across green cloth. They flew low. They were careful. They were not careful enough. Hedwig hooted indignantly from the back seat. The sun slid west. Shadows stretched and stitched themselves together. The car began to complain, first politely, then with real mechanical outrage. The castle appeared at last. Turrets and bridges lit from within, windows bright against the dusk, the lake a black mirror. Relief rose, and then the engine coughed, hiccuped, and died. The Ford Anglia, affronted by the demands of boys and long flights and bad decisions, dropped. They hit the whomping willow. Trees shouldn't fight back. This one did. Branches thrashed like arms full of grievance. Leaves roared. Bark groaned as if it were breathing. The car took a punch to the bonnet, then the side. A window shattered into diamond rain. Harry and Ron flailed for their trunks. Hedwig shrieked, furious and alive. The willow swung again, and the Anglia, in an act of self-preservation no human could have pleaded for, spat the boys and their luggage onto the lawn and lurched away, bumping into the night with a final sullen backfire before vanishing into the trees. Silence fell. The castle glowed. Somewhere distant, singing drifted like warm smoke. They gathered their trunks as if they could gather their dignity with them and limped toward the front steps where Professor McGonagall waited with a look that could have frozen rivers. Snape appeared from shadow like an old habit. There were detentions. There were words about responsibility pronounced with surgical precision. There was a meal eaten in the corner of a vast hall while hundreds of eyes pretended not to look. Harry kept his head down. Ron turned an alarming shade of red. Somewhere in the middle of the reprimand, a strange thing happened inside Harry. Shame rose, burned, and then cooled. He was here. He had made it. Whatever trouble came would be measured against that one bright fact. Night in the Gryffindor dormitory carried a different silence from Privet Drive. The castle breathed. Paintings whispered in neighbouring halls. Laughter curled down staircases and faded. And then, just as sleep began to lay its hand on Harry's eyes, something colder brushed the back of his mind. A thread of sound so thin it could have been imagination. A voice, dry, hungry, moving through the walls themselves. "Come to me." Harry sat up, heartbeat thudding. Ron snored. The room was ordinary in that enchanted way Hogwarts had. Shadows with their own personalities, moonlight resting on trunks, curtains like still lakes. The voice slid away as if pulled through stone. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe he'd dreamed it. Morning would bring classes and books and Ginny's shy glances and Lockhart's blinding smile and whispers about a caretaker's cat and a message written in a hand that looked wet. Morning would bring the year that would teach Harry a new kind of fear, the fear of things that didn't breathe in the normal way, of secrets hidden in plumbing and language forgotten by most living mouths. Morning would open the door into a corridor no one should have entered. But tonight, Harry lay back down, the smell of castle stone cool and a little old, the sound of the lake slow as a sleeping animal, and let sleep take him. Somewhere beyond the walls, something ancient turned, listening to the heartbeat of a boy who had flown a car into a tree and still believed that luck, somehow, was on his side. Outside, the whomping willow settled its branches as if tucking itself in. The Ford Anglia dreamed in the forbidden forest, half wild already, leaves on its bumper like a crown it hadn't asked for. And under the school, further than most imaginations cared to walk, a whisper slid over water and waited for the year to begin in earnest. Morning came softly to Hogwarts. The lake outside gleamed like steel under a pale sky, and mist hung low over the lawns, curling around the roots of the whomping willow as if testing its patience. Inside, the castle yawned itself awake, portraits stretching, ghosts drifting lazily from their frames, and the great bell tolling somewhere deep in its ribs. Harry and Ron ate breakfast under a storm of whispers. The story of the flying car had spread faster than fire through dry parchment. Fred and George had already retold it half a dozen times, each version slightly more heroic. Ginny's face kept turning red, not entirely from embarrassment. McGonagall had assigned them a month's worth of detentions. Harry accepted it. It felt almost like a tax you paid for getting back to magic at all. At the staff table, a new face beamed down at them, shining brighter than the candelabras. Gilderoy Lockhart, in turquoise robes that shimmered with enchantment. His teeth were too perfect to be trusted, his smile practiced like a spell, and his voice carried across the hall like a charm gone slightly wrong. "Let us begin a new year of learning and laughter," he called. Even from the Gryffindor table, Harry could see Hermione clapping with embarrassing enthusiasm. Classes began. McGonagall's transfiguration lessons were as precise as ever. No nonsense, neat magic that demanded control. Professor Sprout had them repotting mandrakes, their small green faces screwed up and shrieking when lifted from the soil. But Lockhart's defense against the dark arts class was something else entirely. He entered the room like a performer walking onto a stage he'd already sold out. "Pop quiz," he announced, dropping papers onto desks. "Simple little test, just to see how well you've absorbed the finer details of my published works." Every question was about him. His favourite colour, forget-me-not blue. His secret ambition, to rid the world of evil and sell more books. His ideal birthday gift, harmony between all magical creatures and a bottle of Ogden's fire whiskey. By the time he finished boasting about his supposed adventures with werewolves and banshees, Ron leaned over and whispered, "He's a fraud. A handsome fraud, but still." That night, Harry fell asleep to the familiar creaks of the tower and the smell of wood smoke. But then, the voice again, thin as a razor, gliding through stone. "Come to me. Let me rip you. Let me tear you." He sat up, heart hammering. The dormitory was still. The sound was inside the walls, moving fast. Harry shook Ron awake. "Did you hear that?" "Hear what?" Ron mumbled, half asleep. Harry waited, but the voice was gone. Only the wind moaned softly against the glass. When morning came, he told Hermione, but she just frowned, rational as always. Maybe it's your imagination. Hogwarts is full of strange noises, but Harry knew the difference between strange and dangerous. Days turned into weeks. Quidditch practice returned. The smell of the grass, the cool air against his face, the flash of gold that pulled everything else into focus. Up there, with the wind roaring past, the weight of secrets lifted. For a few precious minutes, Harry felt free again. Then came the message. It was Halloween night, the great hall filled with floating pumpkins and the smell of cinnamon and roasted meat. Lockhart had decorated with the enthusiasm of someone who mistook volume for taste. Fluttering bats, singing skeletons, a glowing portrait of himself in a vampire cape. Harry and Ron grinned through the chaos, but Hermione kept looking down the table toward the teachers, her attention caught by a quiet conversation between McGonagall and Snape. Their expressions were tight. Something was happening. When the feast ended, Harry heard it again. The voice, closer now. Kill! Kill! It slid through the corridor like a cold breath. He turned sharply, following it. Harry, wait! Ron called, but Harry was already moving. The voice grew clearer with every turn, each word slicing through the hum of the crowd. He ran up a stairway, down another, the echo of his footsteps bouncing back. Then the voice stopped. What replaced it was worse. A hush, deep and absolute, as though the castle itself were holding its breath. The corridor ahead was empty except for the writing. Crimson letters gleamed wetly on the stone wall, dripping down onto the flagstones below. The Chamber of Secrets has been opened. Enemies of the air, beware. Beneath it hung something motionless. At first, Harry thought it was a person, small, suspended by the wrists. Then he saw the reflection of eyes like glass. Mrs. Norris, Filch's cat, stiff and lifeless, hanging from a torch bracket. Water pooled under her feet, rippling faintly. The smell of damp stone filled the air. For a moment, everything inside Harry went still. The corridor seemed to tilt, every noise muffled except for the thudding of his own heartbeat. Then, footsteps, voices. A wave of students poured around the corner, gasping. "Look!" someone shouted. "It's Harry Potter!" Ron froze beside him. Hermione stepped forward, hand over her mouth. The crowd pressed closer, hungry for meaning, for fear to share. "Out of the way!" Filch's voice cracked like a whip. He pushed through, eyes wild. The moment he saw his cat, the sound he made wasn't human, half snarl, half grief. His face twisted toward Harry, every line of it hardening into blame. "You!" he spat. "You killed her!" McGonagall appeared then, sweeping through the mob like a wind that put out fires. "Enough!" she said sharply. "All of you, back to your dormitories." Her eyes flicked to Harry, Ron, Hermione. "You three, come with me." They followed her through passages that grew colder and quieter until they reached Lockhart's office. The man was already there, preening before a mirror. "Terrible business," he said cheerfully, before Dumbledore entered. Dumbledore's presence changed the room. The temperature seemed to shift, the light soften. He bent over Mrs. Norris, examining her with a gentleness that made the hairs on Harry's arms rise. "She's not dead," he said finally, "merely petrified." Filch trembled. But who did it? Who? That, Dumbledore said quietly, is the question. Harry swallowed hard. The words on the wall replayed in his mind. Enemies of the heir. Whose heir? McGonagall's gaze was sharp. Potter, is there something you'd like to tell us? Harry hesitated. The voice still echoed in his skull, that dry, ancient whisper slithering through pipes and stone. But how could he explain a sound no one else heard? He shook his head. No, Professor. Dumbledore's eyes met his, calm but searching, as though peering not just at him, but through him, into the place where the passenger might live if Harry had one. Very well, Dumbledore said softly. But be careful. All of you. They left the office in silence. The corridor outside was empty now, the walls scrubbed clean. Only a faint wet streak marked where the message had been. The torches flickered, shadows rippled. Back in Gryffindor Tower, the common room buzzed with questions. Enemies of the heir. What does that mean? Ron muttered. Hermione's eyes were distant. The Chamber of Secrets, she said slowly. It's an old legend. Supposedly, Salazar Slytherin built a hidden chamber somewhere in the castle. He sealed inside it a monster only his true heir could control. Great, Ron said. And now it's open again. Harry didn't answer. He sat by the fire, staring into the flames. For the first time, Hogwarts didn't feel entirely safe. The stone under his feet seemed thinner, the air heavier. Somewhere deep beneath them, something alive and ancient was waiting. The next days unfolded under that shadow. Filch glared at Harry whenever their paths crossed. Rumours spread like smoke. That Harry could talk to snakes, that he'd lured Mrs. Norris to her fate. Lockhart, ever oblivious, took the opportunity to hold reassuring assemblies in the Great Hall, signing autographs afterward for worried students. But the whispers in the walls didn't stop. Late one night, as the castle slept, Harry sat in the dark by the dying fire, trying to read, trying to forget. Then it came again, a hiss that moved through the stones. Let me rip you. Let me kill you. He stood, the book sliding to the floor. He followed it through empty corridors, the voice leading him upward this time. Ron stumbled after him, half awake. It led them to a flooded landing, water shimmering under torchlight. And at the end of the corridor, another figure, stiff and still. A first-year boy lay petrified against the wall, eyes wide, mouth frozen in a silent scream. Beside him, nearly headless Nick hovered in mid-air, ghostly and transparent, his own face contorted in horror. Harry's stomach dropped. The water around his shoes felt suddenly freezing. Somewhere behind them, Peeves the poltergeist began to wail in delight, his voice echoing off the stone. Murder! Murder in the castle. The spell was broken. Doors slammed open, footsteps thundered, lights flared. And once again, Harry Potter stood in the centre of a nightmare he hadn't made, but couldn't walk away from. The castle changed after that. Voices hushed when he passed. Teachers spoke in low tones at the end of corridors, their eyes sharp, their wands never far from reach. The fear was subtle, but thick, like fog creeping in under the doors. In the library, Hermione worked like someone looking for the last line of a riddle. Ron tried to joke, but the sound felt wrong. And Harry. He began to wonder whether Dobby's warning had been more than superstition. He thought of the letters stolen from him that summer, the way Dobby had whispered about danger, about terrible things to come. Somehow, this had always been waiting. Winter pressed its face to the castle windows. Snow softened the towers, muffled the grounds. And somewhere below, in the black water of the pipes, a serpent slept, waiting for a voice it could obey. Hogwarts in late autumn felt like a castle that had drawn its shawl closer around its shoulders. The days shortened. Shadows gossiped in stairwells. Candles burned lower, their drips like frozen teardrops. In the great hall, talk moved in currents. Students circling news of the cat on the wall, the message in red, the stiff bodies lifted tenderly to the hospital wing. Fear had a smell if you paid attention. Old books closed too quickly, ink spilled and wiped in a hurry, wool singed by nervous wandwork. Lockhart, of course, floated through the mood like a balloon that insisted it wasn't raining. He declared, with a smile that could chip glass, that the best answer to dark events was confidence, and nothing builds confidence like practical defense. Then he clapped his hands and announced something that made the whole school lean forward: a dueling club. The notice went up, and by evening the great hall had been stripped of tables and dressed for spectacle. Torches flared. A narrow platform ran the length of the room like a fencing piste. Students clustered along the edge, humming with equal parts nerves and glee. Lockhart, in robes the colour of a peacock's pride, swept onto the platform and bowed so deeply his hair barely stayed on his head. "Defence," he trilled, "is about poise under pressure. And who better to demonstrate than myself?" He gestured to his assistant, and the room cooled by several degrees. Professor Snape stepped up. His robes hung off him like darkness itself had chosen a shape. He bowed the shallowest bow possible without being rude, and when he straightened, his lip curled very slightly, like he smelled something sour. They took positions. "Wands at the ready," Lockhart sang. "We bow." On 3. 1, 2. Snape didn't wait for 3. A crack of light shot from his wand and slammed into Lockhart, who flew backward as if grabbed by an invisible hand and flung. He hit the platform with a sound like a trunk falling down a stairwell, then popped up grinning, hair only slightly askew. "Excellent example of what you must not allow," he panted. "Now, pair up." Chaos turned into pairs. Harry found himself opposite Malfoy, who smirked as if he'd been practicing in a mirror all afternoon. Ron worked his wand experimentally. It sputtered and coughed like an old kettle. Hermione, precise and ready, lifted her chin and breathed steady through her nose. Lockhart flapped his arms. "Expelliarmus is a basic but beautiful disarming charm. On my mark." Shouts, sparks, a rush of magic. Harry's wand vibrated in his hand. Across from him, Draco fired a spell that fizzed past Harry's shoulder and chipped a torch bracket. Harry sent back a stunner that whistled past Draco's ear and made the Slytherin's hair jump. The room smelled suddenly of ozone and singed wool. "Enough!" Snape's word cracked down. He and Lockhart marched between pairs, tisking, praising, separating. Snape stopped in front of Harry and Malfoy, the expressionless look that meant he was enjoying something in a way he would never admit. "Let's give them a demonstration," he drawled, and pushed the two boys back onto the platform. "Let's have no funny stuff," Lockhart called weakly. "On the contrary," Snape murmured, "I insist." Wands up. The world shrank to the line of Harry's arm, the weight of the wand, Malfoy's thin smile. Serpensortia, Malfoy snapped. The spell hissed. A thick black snake erupted from the end of his wand, hit the platform with a heavy slap, and coiled, head lifting. It turned, tongue tasting the air, eyes like beads of coal. The room inhaled in one great breath and didn't let it out. Lockhart sprang forward with both hands out. "Allow me!" He flicked his wand in what he likely thought was a flamboyant rescue, and the snake, instead of vanishing, rose, angry, thrashing, ready to strike. It turned from Lockhart's fumble and gazed at a Hufflepuff boy who had stumbled backward and fallen, hands up, fingers splayed in desperate defense. The world tilted for Harry. Something old and deep unfurled in him, like a banner ripped from a trunk. He didn't think. He spoke. "Stop," he said. Only it wasn't English. It was language that wasn't learned so much as remembered. The syllables slid like silk over stone. A hiss that was meaning. The snake froze, head swiveling toward Harry, tongue tasting again, then sank down into a coil and stared, waiting. Harry felt everyone's eyes flick from the snake to him. The silence changed flavor, from fear to something like horror. Snape stepped forward and vanished the snake with a neat, quiet spell Harry didn't catch. Murmurs rose. Ron's face was white. Hermione stood absolutely still, eyes wide with something Harry had never seen in them. Not fear of a spell, but fear for a friend. "What?" Harry said, breath shivering. "I didn't want it to hurt him." No one answered. Word doesn't spread in Hogwarts. Word explodes. By breakfast, the story had been told so many ways it was almost folklore. Harry Potter had called a snake. Harry Potter had sent a snake at a Muggleborn. Harry Potter had smiled while speaking to it. By lunch, the name Slytherin sat in everyone's mouth like a sour. By dinner, the phrase "air of" didn't have to be finished for faces to tense. Hermione grabbed Harry and Ron and pulled them into an empty classroom that smelled of chalk and cold stone. "You're a Parselmouth," she said quietly. "You can talk to snakes. That's very rare. And bad," Ron added helpfully. "Well, historically bad. Salazar Slytherin could do it. You know who can do it." "I told the snake to stop," Harry said. He could still feel the language under his tongue like the taste of metal. "I know," Hermione said. "We know. But they didn't understand what you were saying. They just saw you hissing and the snake settling, and—" She shook her head, thinking quickly, because that's how she handled fear. "We need to get ahead of this." "How?" Harry asked. Hermione's eyes flicked sideways like she was catching an idea by the tail. "We find out who's opening the chamber." Ron groaned. "Just us?" "Sure. We'll nip to the chamber and ask the monster to write a confession." "Not the monster," Hermione said. "The heir. And who's the most likely heir walking around with hair gel and a father in a snake cane?" They didn't have to say it. Draco Malfoy. Hermione's plan arrived fully formed and ridiculous. Polyjuice potion. A brew that could turn them, for an hour, into someone else. It was in a book she had read, for interest, and swore she'd only meant to study someday. They would become Slytherins, slip into the common room, and ask the right questions. It would be dangerous. It would be difficult. It would be, she said, with a slightly unhinged calm, effective. "Where would we brew it?" Ron asked. Slughorn's wardrobe. Snape's sock drawer. Hermione's mouth tightened. somewhere no one goes if they can help it. Which is how the three of them ended up in Moaning Myrtle's bathroom. Taps tarnished, tiles cold, the whole place smelling faintly of old soap and deeper loneliness. Myrtle herself drifted in and out of her favourite stall with the self-pitying grandeur of a tragic opera ghost. "What are you doing here?" she demanded, lip wobbling on the word here, as if it had personally offended her. "Homework," Hermione said brightly, setting a cauldron on a cracked sink. "And we will be so quiet you won't even know we're—" "Living," Myrtle snapped, and vanished with a splash that wasn't water. Hermione rolled up her sleeves and started to work. She brewed like she studied, meticulous, relentless, hands sure even when her voice shook. The list of ingredients could have been a prank designed to get students expelled. Lacewing flies stewed for 21 days, leeches, knotgrass, fluxweed picked at the full moon, boomslang skin, which we absolutely do not have, Ron noted, and which Snape will guard like his own childhood. They watched Hermione draw a line down the ingredient list with the edge of her nail. She didn't say steal. She said, procure. They built a plan the way nervous kids build pillow forts, fast, half-whispered, and with a ridiculous belief that it would hold. Fred and George provided the heart of it, a Weasley's wildfire, whiz-bang palmed and kept for a day when trouble would be useful. That day turned out to be double potions with Slytherin. Snape stalked the aisles, cape cutting swathes of cold behind him, voice like a sting as he corrected measurements, leaned over cauldrons, and sniffed disdain. Crabbe and Goyle, thick-shouldered bookends, glooped something lumpy and purple that had the gall to smoke. Harry's hands shook with the ordinary terror of double potions, which was almost comforting. Ordinary terror left room for breathing. And then, like a small sun, a firework arced. George, or Fred, let it slip from his sleeve. It zipped, shrieked, pirouetted, and fell neatly into Goyle's cauldron. The explosion was not subtle. Purple sludge geysered. It painted the ceiling, Snape's robes, several innocent bystanders, and Crabbe's astonished forehead. The room became a wet, furious mess. "Who—" Snape's voice could have cut the firework in half if it had been alive to hear it. In the wash of chaos, students yelping, cauldrons scraping, Snape vanishing steaming puddles with clipped wand flicks, Hermione vanished too. Harry knew without looking where she was. Down the corridor, fast as her legs could go, unlocking Snape's private store with a charm and hands that didn't dare shake, grabbing a pinch of boomslang skin and a scoop of bicorn horn, tucking them into her bag like stolen treasure, then back again. Breath steady, hair only slightly madder than usual, sliding in behind a column of smoke. "Got it," she whispered, eyes shining with equal parts terror and triumph. The rest was patience and fear. Weeks of it. The cauldron sat under Myrtle's sullen guard, a low burble coming from the thickening potion that clung to the sides like it had opinions. They stole time between classes. Ron watched the door. Harry listened to the castle, the murmur of pipes, the long sighs of wind in old stone, the whispers of the scared. Christmas drew near, and with it, a weather that made the castle beautiful, even as it made it ache. Fir trees filled the hall, heavy with icicles that never melted. The ceiling showed a sky frosted with stars. Fewer students stayed than usual. The castle grew quiet in a way that wasn't lonely. It was like a beast sleeping, warm and huge and kind. Perfect for a crime, They needed Crabbe and Goyle's hair. They needed the boys themselves asleep. Hermione, who blushed at copying homework but could plan a felony with surgical detail, baked 2 plump pastries that smelled faintly of chocolate and stronger of sleeping draught. They set their trap on a staircase where the steps turned short for boys of a certain hunger. Crabbe and Goyle appeared as if summoned by scent. Each noticed a cake. Each looked around once. Each popped one into his mouth. They crumpled gently, like trees falling in a dream. Ron and Harry dragged them into a broom cupboard with apologies the boys didn't hear, removed a shoe from each to pluck a hair, and stripped a robe carefully. Hermione made them swear on something to return the garments unwrinkled. Hermione, cheeks warm with a mix of triumph and alarm, produced a small bottle with a swirl of clear liquid. "Polyjuice," she breathed. "Ready." They each ladled a portion of the viscous potion into a cup. It had thickened into a grey-green sludge that looked like something you would scrape off a pipe. The hairs went in, 1 blonde, 1 dark, 1, a cat hair, though Hermione didn't know it yet, caught from the front of a robe she thought belonged to a Slytherin girl. "Bottoms up," Ron said, and gagged before he drank. The taste was everything bad at once: gasoline, overcooked cabbage, a flavour that felt like regret. The transformation hit like a wave: heat, itch, bone rolling under skin, eyes going soft and then hard again. The horrible feeling of being poured into a shape. When Harry could see again, the world had moved an inch to the left. His hands were bigger. His shoulders hung differently. Ron's face had widened, ears gone doughy. Crabbe and Goyle blinked blearily back from where their friends had been. Hermione made a small sound and ducked into Myrtle's stall. "Go," she managed. "I'll meet you later." "Are you—" Harry started. "Go," she insisted, voice tight with something like pain and something like mortification. They had 1 hour. Slytherin's common room hid behind a wall that whispered open for certain passwords, spoken with certain mouths. Luckily, Crabbe and Goyle's mouths moved at the speed of habit. The room revealed itself as a long stone belly of a place. Green light from the lake rippling across the ceiling. Leather chairs like waiting crocodiles. A fireplace fanged in iron. A few students lounged, bored and poisonous. Malfoy appeared like a thought he'd been waiting to say out loud. He looked the 2 of them up and down and smirked. "Took you long enough," he drawled, dropping into a chair. Potter enjoying being a celebrity suspect. Harry made the sound Crabbe might make to mean, "Yes, boss," and leaned his heavy elbows on his knees. Ron did his best Goyle impression, which was to look like a man trying to remember whether he had remembered something. "The chamber," Draco purred, enjoying the way the word made his throat feel. "I hope it's true." Filthy mudbloods terrified. Long overdue. Harry's jaw clenched in someone else's skull. "Who do you reckon opened it?" he managed, aiming for unintelligent and landing somewhere near Neanderthal. Draco's eyes gleamed. "If I knew, do you think I'd tell you?" He sat back, basking. Father always said it was only a matter of time. The last time the chamber was opened, a student died. They expelled someone. Hagrid, I heard. Big oaf. Should have been put down. Father says. The floor under Harry's heart dropped a foot. Hagrid. He didn't realise he'd leaned forward until Malfoy looked faintly amused. "Who's the heir then?" Ron blurted, too eager. Harry kicked his ankle. "Could be a lot of people," Draco said grandly. Me? I wish he smiled like a knife and then, without warning, frowned. What's wrong with your face? The potion began to pull at them like an undertow. Bones knit back, skin twinged. The hour was flaring out like a match burned to a nub. Bathroom, Harry grunted, because Crabbe would. They made it into the corridor before their voices slid in their throats and their hands took their original sizes again. By the time they reached Myrtle's tiled sanctuary, they were themselves. Hermione, however, was not. She had her back turned, hunched small in a stall. When she turned, her eyes were the same, bright, horrified, brave, but her ears were pointed, fur dusted her cheeks, and whiskers trembled near her mouth. Cat hair, she whispered, on Millicent Bulstrode's robe. I didn't know. Polyjuice isn't for. Hermione Granger, best in her year, brilliant in disaster, stared at them with a face that wanted a saucer of milk and nearly cried. They smuggled her to the hospital wing under a cloak of apologies and promised hot chocolate. Madame Pomfrey, who had seen more idiocy passed off as educational achievement than the ministry would admit existed, clucked her tongue and tucked Hermione behind a screen with a plate of sandwiches and a jug of patience. You'll be out in a few days, she said briskly, as if this sort of thing were Tuesday. The Polyjuice had given them what they needed. Draco wasn't the heir, and the chamber had been opened before, 50 years ago, and a student had died. The name Hagrid hung in the air like a bell that wouldn't stop ringing. Outside, snow began to arrive in polite, steady flakes that stuck to the stone and softened everything sharp. Christmas at Hogwarts settled over the castle with ritual and music. A tree in every corner, wreaths against tapestries, the smell of cloves curling along corridors. The school, emptied of most of its students, felt both huge and cosy, the way big houses sometimes do when it's just you and one lamp on. And still, underneath it all, a hiss moved. They ate Christmas dinner with the staff, plates refilling themselves, crackers that exploded with top hats, and mice that squeaked indignantly. Lockhart insisted on carols in a key only he could love. Snape watched him with the look of a man cataloguing reasons. Hagrid raised a glass and told a joke that turned into a story, and then into a sigh. Filch scowled into his pudding as if it owed him money. Night came, and with it, quiet. Harry walked the corridor outside the trophy room and felt it before he heard it. A cold that wasn't temperature, a draft that went through bone. Come to me. He followed it to Moaning Myrtle's bathroom, where water lapped gently across the floor. Myrtle sobbed from her stall. Her glasses bobbed in the toilet like two little lost moons. Someone threw a book at me, she wailed, pointing at a broken cubicle, and then at the floor where a small, battered diary lay, sodden and silent. Harry lifted it. The cover was plain, dark, unadorned. Inside, the pages were empty, clean, waiting, as if they had been listening for a long time. On the first page, in a corner, the faded letters of a name, T.M. Riddle. He turned it in his hands. It wasn't magic. That was the strange part. It didn't feel magic. It felt patient. He carried it away like you carry a question you're not sure you want answered. Outside, the snow fell thicker, smooth in the grounds, making the world quieter. The castle slept, and under the castle, in its stomach of pipes and tunnels, something woke. Slowly, again, at the sound of a voice only a few could hear. Harry slept, dream full of water and writing. In the morning, he would open the diary and try a thing he shouldn't. Ink would answer ink. A boy would speak from 50 years ago. Another story would unspool inside their story. A memory as polished and dangerous as a blade hidden in a book. But for tonight, the castle breathed. The hospital wing light burned low behind a screen where Hermione watched her whiskers in a mirror and rolled her eyes at herself, half horrified, half academically fascinated. In the forest, somewhere, a Ford Anglia made of stubbornness and sap slept with leaves tucked around it. And in the Slytherin common room, Draco Malfoy dreamed of snakes with crowns and woke smiling at nothing. The year had turned, and with it, the story. The duel had taught them what fear looked like. The polyjuice had shown them how far they'd go. The diary would tell them how far someone else had gone before, and how history, in castles like this, doesn't repeat so much as it waits. Snow turned the grounds to a hush. In that hush, Harry turned the diary over in his hands, the way you test the weight of something that looks ordinary, but isn't. T.M. Riddle, the ink on the first page murmured. Nothing else. No dates, no entries, no spells humming from the spine. It felt empty, like a room with the door open and the light off. Back in the Gryffindor common room, the fire painted everything in slow oranges. Ron peered at the diary as if it might bite. "Chuck it," he advised. "If it came out of Myrtle's bathroom, best case scenario, it's soggy. Worst case scenario, it eats your soul." Harry didn't chuck it. He took it upstairs, sat on the edge of his bed, and opened to the first empty page. A quill scratched. "Hello," he wrote. Ink should sit on paper. That's what ink understands. Instead, the words bled outward, thinned, and vanished as if the page drank them. The paper stayed clean, white, waiting. His stomach did a slow, cold turn. He tried again, hand tighter on the quill. "My name is Harry Potter." The letters lingered for a heartbeat, then seeped away. He was standing at the edge of a pond that looked like paper, and the surface wanted him to throw a rock. "Do you know anything about the Chamber of Secrets?" he wrote, breath shorter now. The reply did not appear all at once. It lifted out of the page as if breathed there by someone on the other side. "Yes," wrote the diary in a tidy hand. "I am Tom Marvolo Riddle. I know much about Hogwarts. Ask me." Harry glanced toward the door, as if the idea of being seen talking to a book would make this more absurd than it already was. What happened the last time the chamber was opened? Ink blossomed. "Let me show you." The page went black. The darkness wasn't ink. It was like the room had blinked. Then the black wasn't black. It was a corridor heating into focus, candles guttering with old light. Harry wasn't reading anymore. He was standing there, some delicate magic laying the memory over the world like tracing paper. He saw the great hall as it had been 50 years ago. Tables, banners, students in robes cut a little differently, but laughing the same way. He saw a boy with dark hair and the kind of posture that comes from a stubborn pride. Tom Riddle. Prefect badge glinting. Eyes cool, clever, careful. People smiled when they passed him. Teachers paused as if he were a promise of good things to come. Then the laughter thinned. Whispers gathered in corners like fog. "Another attack," someone murmured in a voice that made the hair rise on Harry's arms. "They'll close the school," someone else said, fear and excitement braided together. Riddle stood in Dumbledore's office, Dumbledore younger but with the same blue gaze that saw more than it let on. "We must protect the school," Riddle said, sounding earnest enough to anchor a ship. "I can help." Dumbledore listened, head tilted, a bird considering a song. Night after night, the memory drew him through passages he knew well, and passages he didn't. Riddle moving like a boy born to corridors. Then, another scream swallowed by stone. Another body lifted carefully to the hospital wing. The night it broke, the air of the memory smelled cold and damp. Riddle moved with purpose. He took a staircase Harry had only ever used to escape Filch. He paused at the shadow of a lamp. The large figure it lit could only be Hagrid. Young, huge, worried in the way gentle people look worried. Something shifted behind him. Skitter, hiss, the nervous music of something with too many legs. "Aragog," Hagrid soothed, voice low. "You didn't mean it, did ya? He's just an overgrown." Riddle's wand appeared, steady, righteous. "It has to end," he said. The memory swelled like a breath in Harry's lungs. Light flashed. The thing behind Hagrid skittered harder, deeper into the dark. Hagrid threw his arms wide, boy and man in one body, trying to block the spell with his size and his belief that love could be a shield. The memory froze, caught on that tableau. Riddle upright, wand alive, Hagrid huge and hurt and confused. Then the darkness folded, and Harry was on his bed again, the diary closed in his lap, his heart climbing out of his throat. Ron listened to the retelling with his mouth open. "Riddle framed Hagrid," he breathed. Or, if he didn't frame him, he let everyone believe it. Typical. Harry stared into the fire. He felt a new ache forming. Hagrid in the middle of a story that never belonged to him. Hagrid tending a monster with gentleness because gentle people try gentleness first. Hagrid expelled, his wand broken, forbidden to do magic. Expelled from a place that should have loved him. 50 years, and the lie still lay smooth as ice. He put the diary away in the bottom of his trunk and told himself he would take it to Dumbledore. He would. Tomorrow. But Hogwarts has a way of rearranging tomorrows. It began with a sky the colour of polished slate and a Quidditch pitch that smelled like wet grass and speed. Slytherin versus Gryffindor. Banners blazed, faces painted, scarves knotted. The world narrowed to height, wind, and the tiny sizzle of gold somewhere in all that air. Madam Hooch's whistle sliced the morning. Brooms jumped. The first moments of a match are always noise, whoops, jeers, the roar when a chaser threads a quaffle through the right ring. Then it settles into rhythm, and Harry lives where the rhythm is. He saw it right away, a bludger that flew like it had a grudge. Bludgers are mean by design, but they share the malice around. This one didn't. It hunted. First it missed him by a whisper. The second pass clipped his sleeve and turned his arm numb. Fred and George swarmed it with bats like two valiant bees trying to headbutt a thunderstorm. "It's after you," George shouted, face tight. "Must be sensing your charm," Fred yelled, and the joke didn't land because he was worried. Harry climbed, dropped, swerved so hard his broom moaned. The bludger followed, learning his angles, punishing his patterns. Through it all he kept a piece of his attention where it belonged, hunting the snitch. A flash of gold near the Slytherin goal. There, a blink's worth, then gone. He dove. The bludger slammed his shoulder so hard fireworks burst behind his eyes. He pulled up, breathing like he'd forgotten how not to choke. "Switch!" Fred cried to George. I'll take the possessed cannonball. You screen Potter. It was half a plan. It was enough to keep Harry alive long enough to spot the snitch again. Just above Malfoy's left ear, a taunt. Harry lunged. The bludger found his arm and hit wrong, or right, depending on your view. Bone gave like wet chalk. Pain came bright and complete as a spell. He didn't stop. He tucked, turned the pain into a direction to move away from. Malfoy reached. Harry reached farther. Fingers brushed gold. The snitch writhed in his palm with a living joy that zippered into his skin. He pulled up and didn't black out until his broom tried to reassure him by being under him when the ground arrived too fast. He woke to the sky and faces leaning in and the slick of pain across his shoulder. Lockhart elbowed people aside, beaming as if he'd personally won whatever there was to win. "A little scale grow," he trilled, "would be dreadfully slow. Allow me." He flourished his wand. The spell that came out wasn't in any textbook. It landed like a bad idea. Harry's arm didn't hurt anymore. It didn't feel like an arm anymore either. It felt like a long wet sleeve with nothing inside. He lifted it. It flopped in a way that made several people look green around the edges. Madame Pomfrey, the only adult in any room she entered, clamped her jaw so hard you could hear her teeth object. "You idiot!" she hissed at Lockhart, who laughed until the sound bumped into her anger and died. "Hospital wing," she told Harry, gentler. "Now." Skeeler Grow burns from the inside while it does the miracle, and the night stretched long, bones knitting themselves stealthily back together. The ward smelled of starch and old spells. Beds breathed. Moonlight made little squares on the floor that tried to be comforting and almost were. Around midnight, the lamp at the far end of the ward shivered. A figure slipped through the door with the silence of someone used to being kicked if discovered. "Harry Potter mustn't be angry," Dobby whispered, eyes like two anxious lamps in his small face. Harry stared. "The barrier at King's Cross. Did you—" "Dobby did," the elf admitted, wringing hands that looked like they could tie themselves into knots. "Dobby blocked it, sir. For Harry Potter's own good." "And the bludger?" Harry's voice had the calm people get when they've reached the end of patience and found a cliff. Dobby tried to bang his head on the bedside table and only stopped because Madame Pomfrey had a nurse's reflex for preventing damage. He settled for keening softly. "Dobby is ashamed." Dobby broke the rules. Dobby thought, if Harry Potter thought Hogwarts was too dangerous, Harry Potter would go home. "People are being petrified," Harry said, and the words said themselves more quietly than his anger. "If you know something, tell me. Tell Dumbledore." Dobby's ears flattened. Dobby cannot. Bad things happened when it opened before, and now it is worse. The chamber. The air. He swallowed, eyes shining. Dobby must go. Wait, Dobby. But he'd already slipped away, leaving the air full of the kind of apology that can't fix anything. The ward drifted back towards sleep. Harry lay with his arm wrapped in a potion that smelled like hot metal and feeling like he was caught between two kinds of helplessness. The kind that comes when you can't move, and the kind that comes when you don't know enough. The door banged open. Light from the corridor sliced the room into sharp stripes. A boy stood there panting, camera strap across his chest, hair sticking up from haste. Colin Creevey, eyes bright. "I brought—" he began, and then stopped. The sound he made next wasn't a sound people make when they're allowed choices. He stiffened. The camera hit the floor and cracked open. Madame Pomfrey cried out. Her wand was already up, the pattern of her magic neat, efficient, snapped from training and 100 little emergencies. Another one, she breathed. Oh, you poor boy. Colin lay rigid, eyes glass, a thin sheen on his skin as if frost had touched him and changed its mind. Madame Pomfrey bent to his camera. The film inside had fused into a slab, ruined by a light so bright it wasn't light at all, but a refusal of it. The hospital wing filled rapidly. Dumbledore first, silent in a way that had gravity. McGonagall, tight with a fear she turned into order. Snape, eyes narrowed not in victory, but in calculation, his mind moving like fast shadow. Filch, pale around the mouth, hand gripping a handkerchief like something live. Lockhart started a sentence and let it evaporate under the combined climate of the other adults. Dumbledore straightened, his face as old as stone and as kind. We must be vigilant, he said simply. The school will stay open, but tighter measures. Harry watched the grown-ups in the way children do when they're trying to read the truth on their faces. The truth was complicated. The truth was, even Dumbledore was afraid, though he wore the fear the way good captains wear weather, on the outside, where they can see it. By morning, the rumours grew legs and ran across the school. Creevy, petrified. A camera melted. Potter's involved. You saw the duel. He's a parcel mouth. The last word had become an accusation. Harry felt it on his back, like chalk dust you can't brush off. Hermione returned from the hospital wing minus whiskers and irony. She coaxed the facts out of Harry and bit her lip until it went white. We were right about something, she said, pacing. A basilisk. No, don't look at me like that. I'm not guessing. I'm building. The petrification, not death, because no one is looking at it directly. The water on the floor, the ghost petrified, because he saw through. Oh. Her eyes widened, thoughts blooming. We need proof. We need a source. Harry thought of the diary in his trunk. He went to fetch it. The room was ordinary in the Gryffindor way. Scarlet curtains, a trunk lid with a squeaky hinge, a draught that came through the window near Neville's bed and smelled like rain. He opened his trunk carefully, as if the diary might be listening. It lay where he'd left it, patient as ever. Back in the common room, the three of them sat close together, knees bumping, fire snapping gently. Harry dipped his quill. What did you mean? Let me show you. Show me what Hagrid did? He wrote. The ink lifted and unfolded into, you must trust me, and then, slowly, take my hand. The paper softened under his palm like water does before it breaks. He pressed his fingers into the white of the page and fell through. The memory welcomed him like a story that had been waiting to be told again. The same greenish light, the same prefect badge, the same upright boy standing at crossroads he had chosen with unusual confidence for someone his age. But the angles sharpened this time. He noticed the set of Riddle's mouth when teachers weren't looking. He noticed how long he let his kindness sit near cruelty without moving to cover it. He saw Riddle report Hagrid again, heard the same words, watched the same flight of legs that shouldn't have belonged anywhere in a castle. He watched the wand rise. He knew memory couldn't be changed. He still wanted to step in front of Hagrid and say no. So loudly the memory would have to obey. He couldn't. It sighed past him, smooth, inevitable, a river down a carved bed. He surfaced to the common room lamplight and Hermione's hand tight on his sleeve. "Harry," she asked softly, "what did you see?" "Same," he said, "but worse." He stared at the diary, its cover innocently blank. "Riddles. Good at looking good." Ron nodded. "Some people wear the right face so well, you forget to ask if it's a mask." The days that followed came like beads on a string pulled too tight. The castle hardened its routines. Teachers escorted students. Prefects took patrols more seriously than their OWLs. Lockhart doubled down on smiles like bandages that didn't stick. Filch scrubbed walls that were already clean. The fat lady changed passwords every night, like a lioness pacing a short wall. And still that voice moved in the pipes like wind under a door. "Come to me. Let me kill you." Sometimes Harry wasn't sure if he heard it, or if he remembered hearing it so loudly it left an echo that lasted. He wrote in the diary again, asking questions delicately, feeling for edges. Riddle answered with patience and the kind of politeness that makes you wonder what it's covering. He spoke about a girl who had died last time, about a monster that moved where no one could walk, about a school that had almost closed. He never quite said, "I did this," or "I wanted this," or "I am this." He circled and allowed Harry to circle with him until the shapes their questions made looked like certainty. Hermione collected clues like a magpie does bits of silver. The rumour of a boy who heard voices in the walls once before, the timetable of the attacks, the places they happened. Ron cross-referenced with gossip because gossip in Hogwarts is data if you're brave enough to treat it that way. Harry watched corridors like they might breathe. They were getting close to something. You could feel it the way you feel a storm the day before it comes. Pressure, a taste of iron on your tongue, the way sounds carry oddly and make you check the sky. It broke on an ordinary afternoon. The corridor outside the library filled with a moving wall of fear. A prefect shouted for space. Teachers cut through the crowd like oars in water, pushing panic back in neat, practiced strokes. On the floor lay Justin Finch Fletchley, eyes glazed, body stiff, his book still open under one rigid hand. Beside him, nearly headless Nick hovered in a kind of upright collapse, his ghostly skin grey as old milk. The person who could never be beheaded was petrified, and it did something to the room that made Harry's bones feel hollow. "Potter," a voice said, his name in it like a blame hammered flat and then folded back on itself. Ernie Macmillan stood rigid, jaw set. "You were found there last time. You're here now. You speak to snakes." Harry could only look at Justin and feel the way fear turns even friendships into suspects. "I didn't," he said, and knew too well the way truth shatters when it hits a story people prefer. He went to Dumbledore's office that night at McGonagall's summons, sat in a room that smelled like lemon drops and phoenix feathers and old wood. A bird in the corner looked like a bedraggled leftover of something that ought to be splendid. It burst into flames as he watched, disappeared into ash, and then lifted its newborn beak from the grey with a sound that made his skin prickle. "Forks," Dumbledore said mildly. "A phoenix. They burn when it is time to be born again." Harry felt something in his chest loosen without letting go. "Sir," he said, the word carrying more questions than letters. "I'm not... am I..." He lost the shape mid-air. He wanted to say, "Am I dangerous?" Am I the kind of boy who becomes the kind of man who makes corridors write in blood? He settled for, "Do you believe me?" Dumbledore looked at him the way a good man looks at a wild world and says yes anyway. "I do," he said simply, "and help will always be given at Hogwarts to those who ask for it." Harry walked back through the halls less alone than he had been, which is different than not alone. The diary pressed against his ribs inside his robe like a second heartbeat. He thought of Riddle's tidy ink, of Hagrid's big hands, of Dobby's fear, of a snake that obeyed only a certain voice. When he climbed through the portrait hole, Hermione was waiting, hair frizzed by a day of thinking too hard. She held up a paper clutched with excitement and worry. "I think I've got it," she whispered. "I think I know what's in the pipes." The words were there. The solution was there. It only needed proof. Hermione's eyes were shining the way people's eyes shine when they've put the last piece into a difficult picture and seen the puppy, or the ship, or the monster in the middle. She looked at the two boys she'd chosen as her family. "I have to check one more thing," she said. She never came back from the library that afternoon. They found her an hour later, around a corner that smelled faintly of stone and triumph. She lay stiff, hair a halo around her head, eyes glass and startled. In her hand, clenched tight enough to bruise, was a mirror shard that had caught the last thing she'd seen and saved it from killing her. The corridor filled with that quiet again, the one that makes you wish someone would just drop a plate so the world would remember how to make a sound. For Harry, the quiet hardened into a vow he didn't say out loud. Find it. Find the thing in the walls. Find the boy in the book. Find the door they keep saying is legend. Open it before it opens you. The diary lay waiting upstairs, patient as always. Downstairs, Hagrid sat in a cottage that had too much empty in it and stroked a huge dog's ears, the way men do when they're pretending not to be afraid. In the staff room, professors compared maps of pipes to lists of corridors and failed to see where the two overlapped. Dumbledore looked older than he had in years, and still somehow steadier than anyone else could manage. And far under the floors, in a cathedral of stone and water, a skin slid against stone the way knives whisper across wet whetstones. The thing in the pipes listened for a voice like a password. It has waited 50 years. It could wait a few nights more. Sleep if you can, the castle seemed to say. You will need your strength. Night at Hogwarts fell quietly that spring. The castle lights dimmed one by one, and the rain pressed its cool palms against the windows, turning every reflection into a dream of itself. Yet beneath that stillness, something restless had begun to move. A fear that crept under doors, filled conversations, and lingered in the air like smoke. The attacks had stopped for a time, and that silence frightened people more than noise. It meant the monster was waiting. It meant the next scream would come when no one expected it. Harry hadn't slept in days. The empty space where Hermione used to sit in the library felt like a missing tooth in the smile of the castle. Her books were still stacked neatly on the table, her quills still lined up like soldiers. But she wasn't there. Just the faint smell of ink, parchment, and lavender soap, the last small proof that she had existed in that spot. Ron stayed close to him now, trying to joke, but running out of jokes that didn't sound like prayer. Then, one cold evening, everything turned. The door to the great hall slammed open. Lucius Malfoy's voice cut through the dinner chatter like the edge of a sword. "The Minister for Magic requires your presence, Dumbledore." Cornelius Fudge stood just behind him, hat clutched nervously, smile stretched thin. "Terrible business, terrible," he muttered. "But the governors insist. Precautionary, you understand. Just until it's resolved." The castle went still. Fudge's men stepped forward. They took Hagrid too. Said he'd been expelled once. Said suspicion was enough this time. Hagrid's enormous shoulders slumped as they led him away, but his eyes found Harry and Ron in the crowd. "If anyone wanted to find out some stuff," he said, voice rough, "follow the spiders." And then he was gone. Dumbledore too. The great doors closed, and with them went the last two people who made the castle feel safe. That night, rain lashed against the windows, and thunder crawled over the mountains. Harry lay awake, hearing it all like the growl of something waking up under the floorboards. The next morning, Ron found him staring out at the dark forest. "You're not seriously—" "Following the spiders," Harry said. "He told us to." Ron blanched. "Have I mentioned I hate spiders?" "Only every day since we met." "Good. Just making sure." They waited until night, until the rest of the school slept, and slipped under the cloak. The grounds were silver with moonlight. The trees loomed like black ribs. The forest smelled of damp earth and old secrets. And when the light of Harry's wand hit the nearest trunk, they saw it. Hundreds of spiders, small and gleaming, all moving in one direction, like thoughts drawn to the same dark idea. They followed. The deeper they went, the quieter the world became. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Their feet sank into moss, the sound swallowed by the forest's hunger. Then came the clicking, faint at first, like pebbles falling down a well, then louder, closer, multiplied. Something moved in the dark, many somethings. "Lumos," Harry whispered, and the light caught the edge of a web thicker than rope. The forest opened into a clearing and a smell hit them. Damp fur, earth, and decay. A shape the size of a carriage shifted out of the shadows. Legs first, then eyes. Dozens of them. "Aragog," Harry said softly. The creature's voice came like creaking wood and slow breath. "Who comes into my forest?" Harry swallowed. "Hagrid's friends. He sent us." The spider moved closer, its hair catching the light. "Hagrid. Good man, kind man. Brought me from the castle when they said I was the monster. But I am not. The girl died, yes, but not by my fangs. I never saw the chamber. I never knew the creature inside." Ron's breathing was quick, ragged. "If it wasn't you," Harry said, "then what was it?" The spider tilted its enormous head. "It was born of the castle. Older than language. We fear it as you do. Even my children will not speak its name." Something in the shadows stirred. More legs, smaller, but still too many, creeping closer. "Hagrid told us never to harm humans," Aragog went on. "But Hagrid is gone, and the meat has come to us." The forest moved. A wave of spiders poured from the trees, clicking, hissing, the sound like dry rain. "Ron," Harry said. "The car." "The what?" But the headlights cut through the black before he could finish. The Ford Anglia, long lost to the woods, burst into the clearing with the snarl of a wounded lion, doors flinging open like arms. Harry and Ron dove inside. The car lurched, engines screaming, tires spinning through mud. Claws scraped the metal, windows cracked. The forest fell behind them, the clearing swallowed by darkness. When the car finally spat them out at the edge of the trees, the dawn was pale and thin. Both boys stumbled out, covered in web and mud, shaking with leftover terror and laughter that wasn't really laughter. They staggered back to the castle, shoes caked with forest, minds full of questions. Aragog hadn't killed the girl. He'd feared the real monster, something that lived in the pipes, something even spiders fled from. That afternoon, Harry went to his trunk to write it down, to ask the diary what it knew, maybe even to tell it about Aragog. But the diary was gone. He tore through everything. Blankets, books, cloak, empty. Someone had stolen it. Someone knew. Days passed without word. The castle's heart beat slower. The portraits whispered. Students walked in pairs now, eyes wide in the dim corridors. The smell of fear was a physical thing, a mixture of sweat and dust and candle smoke that clung to everything. Then, one evening, Harry and Ron walked into the great hall and saw the crowd. A cluster around the notice board, faces pale, mouths tight. The message read, "Her skeleton will lie in the chamber forever. Beneath it, Ginny Weasley is missing." Ron's face went hollow. My sister." The sound that came out of him wasn't language, just panic shaped into air. Harry gripped his shoulder. Around them, the hall dissolved into noise. Teachers shouting, students crying, prefects herding people out. McGonagall's voice cut through the chaos. All students to their dormitories. Professors, to the staff room. The boys waited, hearts pounding, until the corridors emptied. Then they followed. Inside the staff room, voices collided. Fear, blame, exhaustion. Snape said quietly, "Perhaps Potter would care to tell us again how he knows nothing." McGonagall silenced him with a look. Lockhart, lounging near the fire, smiled nervously. "You know, it's rather my area of expertise. Basilisks, monsters, damsels in distress. I suppose I could." "Excellent idea," Snape said silkily. "You can lead the rescue." Lockhart froze. The professor's eyes all turned on him, and for the first time, his smile cracked. "Well," he stammered, "wouldn't want to rob anyone else of the glory." But McGonagall's voice was quiet and final. "Go, Gilderoy. We'll await your return." When he left, the teachers sank into silence that said everything words couldn't. Harry turned to Ron. "We can't wait for him." "You mean?" "I mean we have to go after her." And then Harry remembered Hermione's hand, clutching that mirror shard. They ran to the hospital wing, breathless. Madame Pomfrey looked up from her rounds, eyes sharp. 5 minutes. Hermione's hand was still around the mirror. Carefully, Harry pried her fingers open. A scrap of paper was folded inside. He unfolded it. It was a page torn from a library book titled Basilisk. He read aloud, "A giant serpent that kills with its gaze. Spiders flee before it. Only the crowing of a rooster can kill it." At the bottom, Hermione had scrawled one final note. "Pipes." It hit them like thunder. The voice Harry heard. It moved through the plumbing. The thing had been inside the walls all along. And if the monster had taken Ginny, there was only one place it could have gone. The Chamber of Secrets. They found Lockhart in his office, packing his framed photographs into a suitcase. Running away? Harry asked coldly. Merely strategic withdrawal, Lockhart said weakly. Good, Ron said, stepping closer. You're coming with us. Lockhart blinked. Oh, am I? You are, Harry said. His voice didn't sound like his own. It sounded like resolve. They marched him through the castle. The building seemed to watch them go, its torches flaring brighter, its shadows shifting to let them pass. Down the stairs, through the door to Moaning Myrtle's bathroom, the place where the year's worst secrets began. Myrtle hovered near the ceiling, tears floating like pearls. Oh, hello, she sniffed. Come to die. Not if we can help it, Harry said. Myrtle, how did you die? Her face brightened at the attention. I was crying in the stall. I heard a voice. Then I looked, and those big yellow eyes. And that's the last thing I remember. She pointed to a sink. There. Harry knelt. On the side of the tap, almost invisible, was a small engraving. A snake. He took a breath and hissed softly, the language of serpents sliding out like silk. The tap glowed green and spun. The sink sank into the floor, revealing a dark tunnel wide enough for a man to fall through. A cold, wet wind rose from it, carrying the smell of stone and ancient water. Lockhart whimpered. Now that we've found it, I really think... Harry didn't answer. He jumped. The slide was slick and endless, twisting down and down until it spat them into a cavern, the air damp and heavy. Bones littered the floor, small, white, brittle. Charming, Ron muttered. They followed the tunnel deeper. The walls were slick with moisture, carved with serpents so old their faces had softened with time. Then ahead, a burst of green light. A massive stone door stood before them, snakes etched into its surface, their bodies coiled together in a spiral. Harry stepped forward, whispered the word, and the snakes uncoiled, stone grinding against stone, the door splitting open. The Chamber of Secrets. It stretched out like a cathedral, pillars carved into serpents, the air thick with age. Water pooled on the floor, reflecting the green glow from somewhere unseen. At the far end stood a statue so tall it scraped the ceiling. A man's face, thin, severe, proud. Slytherin. And at his feet, lying motionless, was Ginny. Ginny! Ron shouted, sprinting forward, but Lockhart grabbed a fallen wand and spun around, face pale and desperate. Sorry, he stammered. Can't have you two ruining my reputation. I'll just say I found her like this, tragic but brave. He raised the wand. Obliviate! The wand exploded. The tunnel behind them collapsed with a roar. Stones rained down, sealing the way. Lockhart was thrown backward, eyes blank, smile dazed. Great, Ron coughed. Now it's just us. Stay here, Harry said. If I'm not back, don't say it. Harry went alone. He walked toward Ginny, every step slow, the sound of water echoing like distant applause. Her skin was cold, her lips pale. He knelt beside her, fingers trembling. Ginny, please. She won't wake, said a voice. Harry spun. A boy stood there. Neat hair, school robes, prefect badge. Tom Riddle. Except, not a boy. His edges shimmered faintly, like light through smoke. Tom, Harry breathed. You're the one from the diary. Riddle smiled, and the smile was wrong. I've been waiting to meet you, Harry. It's strange, meeting the person everyone calls a hero. You're not what I imagined. What do you mean she won't wake? She's dying, Riddle said lightly. Little Ginny wrote in my diary all year. She poured her heart into it, her secrets, her fears. And slowly, I poured myself into her. Harry's stomach turned cold. You're using her. Riddle tilted his head. Borrowing. It's a fair trade. She gave me her life. I gave her a purpose. The chamber, the monster, the fear, all so easy to shape through her hands. He stepped closer, the air chilling with his presence. I've grown stronger, Harry. Strong enough to exist without her now. Strong enough to... The name clicked into place before he finished. Tom Marvolo Riddle. Harry's eyes flicked to the diary lying beside Ginny. The letters rearranged themselves in his mind. I am Lord Voldemort. See, Riddle said softly. Even then, I used a new name. Something magical. Something that would inspire fear, even in those who never met me. He spread his arms, and the statue behind him stirred. The mouth opened with a sound like cracking stone, and from its depths, something vast uncoiled. A hiss rolled through the chamber, low and ancient. Scales scraped stone. The basilisk slid forward, each movement heavy enough to shake the floor. Its eyes were the size of plates, shining gold green. Harry didn't look at them. He ran. Riddle's laughter echoed off the walls. You can run, but you can't hide from what you are. The serpent struck, shattering a column, sending water splashing high. Harry dove behind another, heart pounding so hard it felt like it might burst through his ribs. Look me in the eyes, Harry, Riddle called. Let's see if you're truly as brave as they say. Something warm landed on Harry's shoulder. He looked up. Fawkes, Dumbledore's phoenix, hovered above him, golden feathers glowing against the green. It dropped something into his hand, the sorting hat, and then wheeled upward, crying out. The basilisk turned. The cry struck it like a hammer of light. The monster screamed, thrashing, blinded. Blood, black and smoking, poured from its ruined eyes. Harry pulled the hat over his head. Help me, he whispered. Something heavy fell into his palm. A sword, silver and gleaming, ruby in the hilt. The sword of Godric Gryffindor. Riddle's voice sharpened. No! Kill him! The basilisk lunged, its fangs gleaming like daggers. Harry swung. The sword bit deep, slicing through scale and flesh. The serpent screamed, convulsed, and collapsed, its body crashing against the pillars. Harry fell to his knees, gasping. He looked down. One of the fangs had pierced his arm. Poison already spreading, heat rising through his veins. The sword slipped from his hand. Riddle laughed, triumphant. You're dying, Harry. Just as she did. And when you're gone, I'll finish her off and step into the world again. Harry's vision blurred. Fawkes landed beside him, singing softly. A sound that wasn't quite music, wasn't quite magic, but something that belonged to both. Tears fell from the phoenix's eyes onto the wound. The pain cooled. The poison faded. Harry reached out, grabbed the diary, and drove the basilisk fang through it. Ink erupted, splattering his hands. Riddle screamed, a high, thin sound, and began to fade, his body unravelling like smoke. The diary shook once, twice, and went still. The chamber fell silent except for the drip of water and the soft rush of air through the statue's open mouth. Harry stumbled to Ginny's side. "Wake up." "It's over." Her eyes fluttered open. "Harry, I tried to tell you. I tried." "It's all right," he whispered. "It's done." When they emerged from the chamber, dirty, exhausted, but alive, the castle greeted them like a held breath released. McGonagall wept openly when she saw Ginny. Ron hugged his sister so tightly she squeaked. Fawkes sang overhead, his light filling the hall like sunrise. Dumbledore was waiting in his office. He listened without interrupting, eyes twinkling like candlelight on water. When Harry finished, the old man smiled gently. "You have shown me yet again," he said, "that help will always be given to those who ask for it, and sometimes to those who deserve it." Then Lucius Malfoy stormed in, all arrogance and cold fury. "My son tells me," he began. But Dobby appeared behind him, trembling, eyes wide. Harry looked at the sock he had slipped inside the diary.